yesterday when I was trying to fight jet lag, I took a hike up the mountain, kind of right behind our hotel, to to the Castle of Santa Barbara. Anybody seen that? Yeah, if you haven't gone up there, you really should. It's an amazing achievement, and the views are awesome. But it really struck me that the security and the permanence of the whole thing really struck me. And I think that blockchain is sort of a modern day interwebby sort of castle on the mountain with the security and the immutability. And I think if I could summarize Sean's introduction, which by the way is a great foundation for the rest of our talks, thank you so much. Excuse me. Said blockchain provides all parties with a single shared source of truth, and sometimes a level of anonymity. We'll talk about that a little more. But very much like ancient stone tablets, blockchain records, pragmatically speaking, can't be changed. And that's really important. So, imagine, if you haven't already begun to imagine, the possibilities that this provides for the registration, recordation, and evidentiary purposes of intellectual property. And of course, that's going to be the discussion of our, I'm already behind my slides, of the next 2 days. So I'm a big fan of the cartoon Dilbert. And what I really like about Dilbert is that while it seems outrageous, it's usually only a very small exaggeration of reality. And I think that, as Sean just mentioned, many people say, oh, blockchain is the answer to every problem. Well, I also am very skeptical of that. However, blockchain does promise to be a transformational technology, and I think that after our discussions in the next couple of days, we can all say that we are not only technologists, but we are also philosophers, just like Dilbert. So why is the lawyer from Washington, D.C. here? Well, I'm here representing the Chamber of Digital Commerce, and the Chamber is a U.S.-based trade association representing players in the entire blockchain ecosystem. The Chamber is also a member of the Global Blockchain Forum, which is a group of associations throughout the world with similar objectives. And finally, the Blockchain IP Council, of which I'm a co-chair, is an initiative of the Chamber, which, as you see, our mission statement is to promote innovation in blockchain and distributed ledger technologies by addressing intellectual property issues. So it really is all issues intellectual property relating to blockchain. Before I get into the substance, I want to give a special thank you to Questel. All the patent searching and analytics that I'm going to show you a little bit of now and a little more of later were done by Daniela Hoyos and her team at Questel, and they did a great job, and again, just a special thanks to them. So if I may, well, let me back up a little bit. You may have noticed the subtitle of my presentation, an interdependent relationship. Well, blockchain and intellectual property have a very complex and interesting relationship. And if I may, I'm going to use two metaphors today. One is the yin and yang, an ancient Chinese philosophy about elements that are different, have different qualities, yet attract and complement each other. And the yin and the yang are IP protection of intellectual property and, IP protection of blockchain, and blockchain being used to protect intellectual property. We'll talk more about that. The second metaphor is that of the double-edged sword, something that cuts both ways. And I use that metaphor to talk about criminal activities. Blockchain and cryptocurrencies in particular have been a tool of criminals and a tool for piracy, but they promise to be a very good tool for law enforcement, and we'll talk about that a little more also. So let's begin with the yin, if you will, using IP theories to protect blockchain technology. So as many of you are aware, many implementations of blockchain technology are based upon open source software. software that's freely available for everybody to use. That includes the Bitcoin blockchain, Ethereum is open source, Hyperledger, what they call Fabric, also open source. However, many of these same implementations add a lot of functionality and innovation to the open source software. And that proprietary innovation is being protected pretty aggressively by parties throughout the blockchain ecosystem. And this is most apparent when we look at patent filing trends. So this chart shows us patent families by first priority date. In other words, the earliest filing date in the family. And we can see that the technology is in its infancy. And in fact, these numbers here are minuscule compared to more developed technologies like semiconductor technologies. And in fact, the first real, critical mass of filings didn't start till 2014. And you see that line there is drawn to 2008, which is the date of the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, just for some reference, which was, as Sean mentioned, the first time we learned about blockchain. So we've seen a essentially exponential rise in filing since then. Now keep in mind, I think everybody here knows that patent filings are not published for roughly 18 months. We can't see them until 18 months after filing. So the results here in 2017, 2016, and even probably part of 2015 are not complete yet. I expect that we will see that continued exponential-like rise, and that the apparent drop-off there in 2017 is probably an illusion. Now, this is a trend that is very typical of technologies in their infancy, and in fact, we saw an identical trend profile in the mid to late 1990s related to web technology. When we look at where are people protecting IP, it related to blockchain technology, we see that US, China, Great Britain are the three big areas of protection. However, again, as most of you know, WO, that fourth line there, refers to the PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty applications, which are international applications that can later be filed as national phase applications in various countries. So I think that over the next several months and years, we're going to see a much broader geographic profile to patent filings in the blockchain space. These next few slides I'm going to go through very quickly because we'll talk about them a little bit later more in detail. But we took and divided the search results into five different categories or sectors of types of companies, which includes academic institutions, cryptocurrency companies, financial institutions, fintech companies, and then the legacy technology companies like IBM and Microsoft and those, and this just shows their filings. We also divided these up into technological categories, those being payments, mining, which is essentially the mechanism for verifying transactions and recording transactions on a blockchain, encryption, smart contracts, and authentication. So the one thing that does strike you from this is that the red is the payments category, and that by far to date has been the biggest technological subject for patent protection of blockchain technology. And has anybody heard the name Willie Sutton? You'll see where I'm going in a minute. Nobody. So Willie Sutton was probably the most prolific bank robber ever in history. And he robbed banks in the US, I think it was literally, almost 100 banks over 3 decades. And he would rob a few banks, he'd get caught, he'd go to jail, serve his time, he'd rob a few more banks, and on and on. And he did that through 4 or 5 cycles. And finally, in his old age, serving out his old age in the penitentiary, somebody asks him, "Why do you rob banks?" And his answer was, "Because that's where the money is." So why, okay, now we'll get back to blockchain. Why are people protecting blockchain technology as it applies to payments? Because that's where the money is. That's a good place to extract a fee and a profit, a good point to take a toll. And we're seeing that, as you would expect, patents are protecting the application of blockchain technology to payments. This slide just shows us the top 10 players, and again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but we can see, oh boy, we had some errors here in format changing, but some of the data in there has been obscured. But anyway, you can see that the largest players are protecting over multiple different categories. When we look at the categories as they emerge over time, again, you see payments, the second one from the bottom, the biggest one, but smart contracts and authentication are two categories of patents that have emerged very recently. So what does the future hold with respect to IP protection of blockchain? I think we're going to see increased filings. I think we'll see increased risk, including patent assertion entities, sometimes referred to as patent trolls. These are parties who acquire patents solely for the purpose of monetizing them. And I think the answer is that we will have to see collaboration within the ecosystem. Again, that's the subject matter of our talk a little later, and so I won't get into that in too much detail. But similar to the land grab with patents, I think we're going to see a branding land grab. I think that the players in this space are diverse. There are legacy technology companies, think IBM, Microsoft. There are big banks, think Bank of America and BNP Paribas and others, and there are these newcomers. And I think that while these established entities enter into new verticals, and while the new players enter into those same verticals, we're going to see a lot of activity in branding, a lot of controversy, and a lot of litigation, frankly. So that's the yin of my yin and yang. The yang being using blockchain technology to protect IP. And Sean touched on this. And I think before we get into that in any detail, let's think a little bit about what is intellectual property. Everybody here knows that, but World Intellectual Property Organization tells us that intellectual property refers to creations of the mind. I think that's as good a definition for us today as any. So how do we define and how do we protect IP protection when it's in somebody's mind? And as everybody here knows, the answer to that question is that we delineate these ideas and we record them in a way that, that we can define them and protect them at the various national trademark offices and patent offices. And there are also private companies that are recording and protecting IP, like Google and Spotify, for example. And this works well enough, but it does have tremendous inefficiencies. And as just one simple example, anybody who's tried to do a worldwide trademark search knows that you have to search the individual databases of each jurisdiction, or rely on the accuracy of and pay for a content aggregation service. Works, but it has, there's a lot of opportunities to increase efficiencies. Another example, is anybody here an author? Anybody ever published a book? Come on, I know some of you. There you go. Okay, so Paul, okay, so I'm sure that the author of a book, the person who creates the value in the book, gets a very small percentage of the revenue. Is that correct? I think it is, yeah. That's why you're sitting here and not on your yacht in Monte Carlo, right? It's a very inefficient process. And blockchain promises to remove many of those inefficiencies in recording IP and even use smart contracts, excuse me, to automatically accept payments and make payments to the IP owners. So Ralph Waldo Emerson in the late 19th century said that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. Well, blockchain technology, I think, could be summarized as promising to be a better mousetrap, particularly for the protection of IP. It could provide a single source of integrated records that provide greater transparency and efficiency. As just one example, the various patent offices or trademark offices could be nodes, if you will, that's what we call participants in a blockchain, on a permissioned or private blockchain, and use that to automatically aggregate all of the records into a single shared source of, again, truth, if you will, or accurate records, without the need for a data integration service. So I love this idea of the stone tablet, and getting back to the stone tablet that was on one of my earlier slides, I did in-depth archaeological research on this particular stone tablet, meaning I Googled it, and isn't that what in-depth research is these days? The Google tells me that this tablet originated from the king of Umma in Mesopotamia, 2400 BC, long time ago. And this tablet is, of course, carved in stone. And if we could read it, and the Google tells me this also, that it defines the boundaries of the kingdom. And it evokes the war god Shara. And it finishes with a curse on anybody who violates the cornerstones of the kingdom. So when publicly displayed, this has many of the attributes of a blockchain. It's immutable. It's literally carved in stone. It at least attempts to have an element of trust by evoking the war god. What could be more trustworthy than a god of war? And it has transparency if it's publicly displayed. So now blockchain technology has the potential to expand this carved-in stone quality to many thousands, millions, or even billions of nodes. And that's where the huge potential comes in. Blockchain technology, in my opinion, is tailor-made for recording IP ownership, IP transactions, and the origin and movement of goods. Various trademark registries, as I mentioned, and patent registries could be recorded on a blockchain in an efficient manner. Copyright deposits, while not required in most countries, could be easily implemented on a voluntary basis with a blockchain, with a public blockchain. And then, as you mentioned, business logic, smart contracts, as we call them, business logic coded on a blockchain could be used to affect payments and make sure the right holders get their right compensation. Louis, Louis, there he is. What a shock, you're here. Louis Stone, could you just introduce yourself? Is there a microphone here?
Yes.
Yeah, can you bring it down? Because I'm going to call on a couple of people. Could you bring it down here?
Yes, thank you.
Just real quickly. Okay, you just lost 10 seconds of your minute, but if you're with Symbiont, and what Symbiont's doing is something interesting. You can stand up. Just be a second. It's interesting with respect to digitizing assets for tracking other persons. If you could take like a minute or less and tell us a little bit about that,
Sure.
be helpful. Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks.
So we are a smart contract and blockchain platform focused on providing solutions for the financial services industry. And one of the very common use cases right now is the notion of taking traditional assets, whether they be physical or contractual, and converting those into digital assets that can be exchanged and transferred in sort of a more streamlined way and get a lot of these benefits of blockchain technology that have been described already. So in one particular case, there's a firm actually based in Europe and Asia that wants to provide more access to private investments from Asia to a broader European and America's audience. So what they've done is worked with us to create a platform where they, on one hand, are buying these traditional private equity stakes, securing them in trusts or other legal structures, and then against those trusts issuing digital certificates or tokens or smart contracts that can be distributed through a network of private banks throughout the world. So you have the real physical asset, or in this case, a contractual asset in the real private equity stake. And then you have this constellation of digital assets that are backed on a one-for-one basis by these, which make which we expect will make the liquidity and the access much greater and more transparent. In addition to that, it will be very easy for regulators and other authorities to track the provenance of these assets over time.
Thanks, Louis. So again, thank you very much. I think that's one example of a current application of blockchain technology for protecting intellectual property. And here are some examples of others. One of the most interesting is PeerTracks. PeerTracks is a streaming music service that uses the Muse platform, which provides clients the ability to record copyrights, payment information, and other IP information all on a blockchain. And I see that Cedric Coban, the founder, is in the house. Cedric, if you could give us just 30 seconds on why this is so much more efficient than other streaming services.
All right. Yeah, I'm really happy about the previous presentation. Well, actually, what you just covered, because this kind of sets the stage for what we're doing. Essentially, it's a blockchain that will track all of the music metadata. So anything that has to do with licensing. Any participant in a song can be put into a smart contract, and I don't have to explain what that is now. And once you have all that data, you're able to know who to pay. But being a blockchain, it's made for, its first use case was to funnel value. So we could actually use it as a means of payment as well. And I'll have a presentation this afternoon, but the very interesting part, for me at least, is that the blockchain itself, in this particular, the way it's built, can be the source of payment. So you wouldn't necessarily have companies holding on to funds or users needing to put in funds to listen to music. You would have the entity itself distribute from its royalty pool directly to the recipients. The protocol is built so that if you go to the previous slide, it was basically identity. You can have a reputation scoring. You can verify identities of people. And we're allowing third parties to plug in to this system and essentially allow people to be paid properly, instantly, transparently on an immutable ledger.
Thanks, Cedric. Appreciate it. So other applications include using blockchain technology to manage the life cycle of intellectual property licenses, buying and selling patents on a marketplace, tracking diamonds, all kinds of applications. So that is our yin and yang, IP protection of blockchain technology and blockchain technology being used to protect IP. Now we'll move on to my double-edged sword metaphor. And the double-edged sword, again, is that blockchain has been a tool for criminals. It promises to be an exceptional tool for law enforcement and recordation of IP. So we mentioned earlier that cryptocurrency blockchains present a level of anonymity. However, that really is, in most cases, merely a pseudonymity, meaning that it's a masked identification. And that mask well, let me back up. That anonymity has been a reason that we've seen criminals use Bitcoin, for example, as payments. Their identity is hidden. However, that anonymity, that mask, can be torn away, if you will, by allowing the relevant agencies to be a node on the blockchain with the proper permissions. So, if there's one thing to think about as far as blockchain and criminal activity, blockchain has superpowers, but these superpowers can be used for good. The success of much activity, much criminal activity, relies on the opacity of provenance. We don't know, if you don't know where goods come from and you can't prove it, then the pirates are more likely to be successful. And these are two examples, the Spanish IPTV Premier League pirate scheme and Petra Diamonds are two examples where criminal activity was successful, at least temporarily, because of the obfuscation of provenance. There was no universal record of ownership. However, as I mentioned, this anonymity can be stripped away. And further, because the data on a blockchain pragmatically cannot be changed, it provides an excellent forensic record for the relevant authorities. One example is Chainalysis. This is a private company, that a public sector company that provides various tools for monitoring and analyzing blockchain transactions on behalf of customers. Is Camilla there you are, Camilla. I told you I was going to call on you too. Could you introduce yourself and just give us 30 seconds on how Chainalysis provides transparency into blockchains for your clients?
Well, thank you. Yeah. So Chainalysis, what we do and how we help the transparency is this place is that based on a lot of heuristic data, we can actually cluster and actually put a label on some of these transactions. So instead of it just being this long Bitcoin address with bits and bytes, we can actually estimate based on the fingerprints if this is an exchange or if it's a merchant service or if it's something darknet web labeled. And that's the way we help law enforcement mainly to investigate cases where they're using Bitcoin transactions.
Great,
I'll
thank
talk
you.
more about that later.
No, that's great, thanks, yeah. And Jarek, is Jarek here? There you are. So Jarek is with Europol. I also would like him to take a moment to tell us about how law enforcement agencies actually see use of blockchain technology as an opportunity.
Yeah, certainly. Now we are going to cover this topic over the next 2 days. But I have to say, we are really, when it comes to blockchain investigations, we are really dependent on the private sector to cooperate with us. So we are dependent on the tracing companies like Chainalysis to provide us with a way of following the money from one Bitcoin address to another. And then we are also dependent on you to provide us with attribution, because some of the addresses, as Camila said, may be represented to us not as a random Bitcoin address, but as an entity, as an exchanger that we can approach and ask for more information about certain Bitcoin address. And then, of course, we cooperate with private sector like the exchangers, who are the gatekeepers. And basically, they have the information we need. So law enforcement would not be able to do anything, basically, when it comes to Bitcoin tracing without effective support from the private sector. And I have to say that at this moment, we are getting a great support from the virtual currency industry.
Great, thank you. So, to use a couple gastronomic metaphors, I hope that I've set the table and whet your appetite for the discussions that we'll have later today and going into tomorrow. I think that it is safe to say that future innovation in this transformative technology will be aggressively protected with intellectual property, and yet this technology will also be applied to protect intellectual property. We'll find that criminals continue to leverage technology, including blockchain technology, for their evil endeavors, but as Jarek just told us, there's a lot of opportunity for enforcement agencies to utilize blockchain technology for detection and for forensic records. So thank you for your time this morning. I hope that this has helped, again, to serve as a little bit of an introduction for the discussions later on. I look forward to continuing them. Thanks.